Hello, everyone. My name is Franny Jefferson. That's actually a shortened version of my middle name, Francis. I do go by that most often to my friends and family, but professionally, I do use my first name, Rhonda. So, just in case you ever see that anywhere, I just wanted to take some time to introduce my podcast. What I'm doing is a podcast on invisible and rare diseases. A lot of times these rare diseases are invisible also, and I'll take some time to explore the terms and meanings of what those are and try to take a look at everyone who's impacted by these illnesses. These are people stemming from just the patients themselves, through family members, and even coworkers and acquaintances that may somehow be impacted by another person's illness. And during this time with the pandemic going on, many people are now going through, to use the cliche, unprecedented times. But when you're dealing with an illness that puts you more at risk, I've actually encountered resentment from people. If I mention that I'm in a risk category for COVID-19, I actually get attacked in some cases, that somehow COVID-19 is the fault of people who suffer from rare illnesses or who have a compromised immune system, that if it wasn't for us, the nation would be back to normal. I want to try to dispel some of those myths because healthy people also get COVID and are impacted. So I do just want to provide a disclaimer that I am in no way a medical expert. I'm not a legal expert, nor am I an expert in insurance. I'm going to try to share what I've experienced going through this rare invisible illness, as well as what some of my family has been through. I did have a sister pass away from an autoimmune disease, and I'll get a little bit more into our stories in future podcasts. But in order to maintain some privacy for my sister, I'm not going to say too much about her story since she's not able to give me permission. And honestly, when she passed away, the idea of being able to do a podcast on your own was not even realized. So I don't know what she would definitely have to say, but I actually think she would be kind of pleased that even almost 10 years after she passed away, we're still remembering her. So just to go over some of the terms that I've mentioned, and that will probably go through a lot of times during conversations and my podcasts, I've used the term invisible disease. And sometimes it's called an invisible disability, but these are just illnesses or conditions that you have, you feel every day. But if someone were to look at you, they would say, why do you have a handicap sticker? Or why are you using, a mobility device? So some examples of invisible illnesses are rheumatoid arthritis. And while I do suffer from some of the aspects of rheumatoid arthritis, it's not technically rheumatoid arthritis. So I'll go in that a little bit more. Fibromyalgia, mental illnesses. And I will be getting into that as well because our body, our mental health, they all go together. Diabetes, things such as celiac disease, Crohn's disease, migraine headaches, heart conditions. These are just some things I'm thinking of off the top of my head. I've also referred to a website called Kaleidoscope, Fighting Lupus. Lupus is considered also an invisible illness. And again, I also have some of the symptoms of lupus, though it's not technically lupus. So while I'm going through some of these, you're probably thinking, well, I know someone who has one of those illnesses. I know someone who has that. So there's just a whole myriad, a whole basically subset of the population that has some type of invisible illness. Some of them are more mainstream, so we've all heard of them, such as diabetes or migraines, but others are not quite so well known. That brings me into some terms of rare diseases and orphan diseases. A rare disease is, really something that's obscure. If you were to go to a doctor, they may need to look up some information. They might have heard of it, but don't really have a lot of experience treating it. I am reading now from a article in Ranker about ranking different orphan diseases. But an orphan disease is a rare disease that's not widely present in the population. The main issue with these is that if you have a disease where maybe only 300 people in the United States, or maybe even the whole world, has this disease, will a pharmaceutical company really be looking at ways to treat it? Will surgeons be looking at ways to try to improve the lives of those 300 people? Odds are the answer is no. So that brings in issues of getting things approved through insurance. Well, there's no FDA-approved treatment for some diseases. With the one that I have, it's called adult onset Still's disease. There was not an FDA-approved treatment until earlier this year. Now, some of the other issues that kind of play into that is that with these rare diseases, there are other factors that make it so that not everybody has the same reaction to treatments. So if I were to find someone else and discuss my treatments from adult onset Still's disease with them, they would have different experiences most likely. So the last thing I want to just briefly discuss right now is something called the Orphan Drug Act. I'm getting much of this information from Wikipedia, and all of my sources, once I figure out how to do that, I will embed into the information on my podcast. But this was the Orphan Drug Act of 1983. What this law did is it wanted to have pharmaceutical companies really look at developing drugs for some of these rare diseases. Some of the examples that Wikipedia mentions are Huntington's disease, ALS, which I did have a very good friend pass away from that. And he looked to be the healthiest person that you would ever know. He was so vibrant and full of life. He was a grandfather, and I just hate that his life was cut short from spending time with his grandchildren. Relatively, some of these diseases don't really impact a lot of people in the United States, and again, all over the world. But it does affect people. And then in turn, it affects their families and their friends and just the impact they can have on society. And I just want to bring awareness so that there's support and understanding for everybody involved. I did mention that there was just recently an FDA-approved treatment with the disease that I have. It has a lot of symptoms. As I mentioned previously, it has some symptoms of rheumatoid arthritis, of lupus. Right now, I'm going to go to the Mayo Clinic, their website, and get some information about how they describe Still's disease, even though I will say this is not really all-inclusive because, again, there's a lot of people who have more symptoms than others, or the severity of the symptoms can be different. So there's just a lot of different factors. So the definition they have is adult Still's disease is a rare type of inflammatory arthritis that features fevers, rash, and joint pain. Some people have just one episode of adult Still's disease. In other people, the condition persists or recurs. This inflammation can destroy affected joints, particularly the wrist. Treatment involves medications such as prednisone that help control the inflammation. I will let you know that is a very, very short, very, very limited definition of Still's disease. It really makes it sound almost like it's a flu that you'll get over. You just have some joint pain, but it's not. It's much more. It mentioned the inflammation destroying joints. It also causes damage to other things, your muscle, your organs. So there's so much more. Some of the main symptoms of Still's disease is a fever. Again, that kind of makes it sound like it's just a flu. But the fever is what they call spiking. What that means is at the time of my first diagnosis, I do believe I'd had other flare-ups previously, but they were never diagnosed properly. But I would go from having a normal temperature to within 2 or 3 minutes, my temperature up to 103 or 102. One time my mother came to get me to take me to the doctor, and I had checked my temperature and it was actually in the 97 range. My doctor's office was less than a 10-minute drive. And because I had been seeing them constantly, when I walked in, they took me directly back to a room. They knew that something was wrong and they couldn't figure it out. And by the time she took my temperature, it was over 102. And that was in a very short drive. So this really gives you trouble as far as regulating your temperature. I had remote controls at that time. One would turn on the air conditioner, one would turn on the heater, and I could never be comfortable. I was also becoming dehydrated because when the fever would break, I would sweat profusely, but I also couldn't keep anything down to eat or drink. There is also a rash. It's called a salmon colored rash. However, I'm going to put some information in there from my case. The rash is caused by the inflammation. Now, I am a little bit of a larger person, but what I found is around my chest or upper arms, the rash tended to be more of that salmon color pretty consistently. In other areas of my body, such as my thighs, where there was a lot more room between any muscles or tissue to my skin, in this case, probably fat was in between there, the rash tended to be marbled. Now, on my hands, my fingers, and even my lips, the rash was raised and blistering. When I talk about my story a little bit more and how I was diagnosed, I will mention that my lips were actually black because of the blistering, and they were trying to heal up. And that was in my mouth as well, my gums. So a rash, again, is kind of downplaying. Sore throat and the swollen lymph nodes in your neck. One doctor described it as it looked like someone had taken a paintbrush with red paint and painted my back of my throat. He had never seen one that red before. Achy and swollen joints. I think the best way to describe it is, let's just say you haven't been running for a while or been to the gym, and you go, when you leave, you're sore, you're achy. Take that and multiply it by 1,000. And that's probably how I was feeling. I couldn't lift my arms on my own. I couldn't walk on my own. Everything hurt. That goes along with the muscle pain as well. The best way that I describe Still's disease for me is it has all of the combination of symptoms for psoriasis, lupus, Crohn's disease, rheumatoid arthritis. I may repeat some of these, but an MS. Basically, it has symptoms where someone may mistake them for something else. About 10 years prior to my diagnosis, a doctor in my primary care's office did start ordering lupus tests and also was looking at Crohn's, but she left the practice soon after, and I also moved to another part of the state, and my symptoms seemed to have been getting better. But 10 years later, I was right back in the same place again, with the symptoms much more severe. So it was really hard to pinpoint, especially when you have the symptoms of one disease and it's in that family of diseases, but it's not really recognized, or there's not a standardized test for it. So at any given time, I'm suffering from at least one of these symptoms. Usually it's more. I've also now developed fibromyalgia. So I've also developed fibromyalgia. I have a lot of pain, and it feels like nerve tingling in my hands and feet. I've fallen quite a few times, and eventually my doctor did finally take me out of work, which was actually on the same day that they were doing or starting restrictions and lockdown for COVID-19. The last thing my doctor said to me when I was leaving the office was, "You need to take care and do not leave the house unless you have to, because if you catch this, you will probably not survive." So I've been in my house for quite a long time now, as it's November, and I am finally feeling up to trying to contribute a little bit more to share those experiences and seeing if we can all just find ways to help each other. Whether you have an orphan or invisible disease, whether you know someone who has one, or all of the above, we can all be here for each other during this time. So as my podcast continues, I do want to try to get different people on, whether they've been a caregiver of someone with a rare disease, whether they suffer from a rare disease, just so many different aspects that probably in one family, you can look at 5 different people and they may have different diseases, but they're all suffering in silence. And some may feel, well, if I say anything, I'll look like I'm a wimp, or I'll look like I'm complaining, because I felt that for so many years. I felt the doctors were looking at me thinking I was a hypochondriac or a drama queen. And I got to a point I didn't want to go to the doctor. I felt that if I went there, they would look at me and say, "Oh, it's her again." And I still feel that. I have another illness that is not associated with the Still's disease, but they do play off each other. I have the autoimmune disease of Still's, and some of my medication decreases my immune system. The other illness that I have severe lymphedema in my legs. It's a very severe swelling where at some points my calves have been over 40 inches around. Right now they're around 30 to 32, but they can get very severely swollen. But that makes me more at risk for infection in my legs, which, because I have no or a very decreased immune system, I get an infection very quickly, and it takes hold very quickly. And so I have to be really careful. And then when that infection sets in, that can lead to a flare-up of the Still's disease. So there is a lot of balancing in my life. When my doctor did take me out, it was after a very severe infection, and my body just could not fight back anymore. For about the past 3 months, I've been almost completely bedridden, with the exception of a little bit, of getting up and cooking. I do sometimes go to the pharmacy just to get out, but for the most part, I'm in my home, and most of the time with my legs elevated. So I hope that this does help some people. I hope that it can help bring awareness and help build a community of those who have these illnesses. Just before I do end my podcast, I do want to mention that Facebook, I found, is a good place to find support, to find a community of those that can help you get through this. There's not many people in my area who have this illness or even anything similar. So to go on Facebook and find someone half a world away that has this, and knowing that they're going through the same thing, my heart aches for them because I can really understand that. But we both would also know that there's someone else there who's feeling this, and let's use each other for support and information. Just real quick, even with as rare as my disease is, I actually ran into someone at work once after I'd had a flare-up, and my voice was very scratchy because of the inflammation. And we were walking. She had said that she hadn't seen me in a few days. She was in another department, so we didn't really talk too much. And she asked if I'd been sick. And I just mentioned I had an autoimmune disease. I was kind of coming into accepting that, so I was discussing it more freely. And she mentioned that a family member of hers had an autoimmune disease as well as she did too. And her family member had Still's disease. Now, this is a disease where, depending on the stats that you look at, some say 1 in a million people have it. Some say 1 in 100,000. I really don't know what the number is because I honestly think more people have it. It's just not diagnosed. And it could be one of those mystery illnesses that someone dies from, because I was very close. If you would like to reach out to me as a topic or to suggest a topic of a disease or medication to discuss, you can email me at seetheinvisible2020@gmail.com. That is S like Sam, EETHEINVISIBLE 2020@gmail.com. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this podcast, and I hope that you do get some information or hope or support from this. Until next time, have a great day, week, and live in the moment.